our the purpose of our committee, the way we've been working the last few years, is we're focusing on greening our buildings that King's Chapel owns, and connecting with local communities and faith groups in the service of environmental justice. And number three, to facilitate education and conversation within the church communities. So I think some of you are here from all of those aspects of what we've been aiming for. And so we thank you for being here. I'd like you to take a moment to offer a prayer. And this is a prayer from Rabbi Elaine Zecher from Temple Israel in Boston. Someone passed it to me and I said, oh, I'm going to hold on to that for the right time. And I think today is the right time. So please take a deep breath wherever you are. Feel comfortable, feel your feet on the ground and feel comfortable in your chair and just listen. To be guardians of the earth, as well as the other elements of nature too, to be messengers of our Torah that teaches us to take care of this precious world created for us to till and protect it. And to recognize that wherever we live, no matter who we are, our destiny is bound up with the fate of all humanity and this planet on which we can thrive. With eyes open, we rise, pay attention, and awaken. It is all on us and on us all. May it be so.
Amen.
Amen. And I hand off to Kent,
All right.
our speaker.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So I know all of us are excited to hear from John Walke. I think his reputation precedes him, but I'll just say a couple things. I won't say much, but he's an East Boston resident, and he's been working for environmental justice and immigrant rights in East Boston and Chelsea for the last 20 years. And before that, he worked in hazard risk assessment and mitigation and natural resource management in Central America and the Caribbean for NGOs. He is, some of you may know this, but he was very active in resisting the new substation in East Boston, and actually made the news as a small group who climbed the fence and had a picnic in the construction site of the new substation. So he puts his money where his mouth is. He gets involved, and we're all looking forward to hearing him talk about his work in Green Roots. So over to you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kent, and thank you all for coming out here. It's a great turnout. Happy President's Day. Assuming like the past presidents we're talking about. And I'm going to give a little talk today, and some of this stuff may be familiar to you, some may be new, but I'm going to talk about what Green Roots does, give a little bit of context to the environmental justice movement, maybe touch on where we are with that movement, and then talk a little bit about some projects that we're working on now. And you'll get to know a little bit more about Chelsea and East Boston in this process as well. So let me just share my screen, make sure this pause. Okay, you're all seeing a bunch of kids holding a banner now? Okay, great. And so So again, my name is John Walke. I'm the Director of Climate Justice and Waterfront Initiatives at Green Roots. We're an environmental justice organization based in Chelsea for the past 30 years. And in the past 10 years or so, we've expanded our work into East Boston as well, where I live. And prior to working here, I was working for a number of years at Alternatives for Community Environment, ACE, over in what is now Nubian Square, used to be Dudley Square. So I've been working in the EJ field in Boston for a little bit. And what Green Roots does, this graphic here, sort of is illustrative of what we see our role is. We are the bullhorn, the sort of mouthpiece for our community. So there you've got a diverse group of people who have all sorts of signs they're holding. And really these different issues like food justice and access to the waterfront and clean air and public health, these are all the sorts of things that are of concern to our community. They're the things that people post questions about on the Facebook neighborhood Facebook groups. They're the things that people go to City Hall to complain about. Transit justice. Look, recently we've gotten into the energy field. I'll talk more about that. And we've had a youth program for a number of years. So we work with the community to engage them in these topics, to educate them about the policies and the science of these topics, and to really empower them to implement projects and solutions to the issues that they encounter in their communities. We want to make sure our community is really driving the work we do. We're a community-led organization. And that community that we're talking about sits along the Chelsea Creek, which is part of the Mystic River watershed. And so we see here, if I can get my cursor out there, the Mystic River coming in from the Everett side, and here's the Chelsea Creek separating Chelsea from East Boston. Chelsea is the smallest city in Massachusetts, but the most densely populated one at just a little under 2 square miles, and about a third of the land mass actually being covered with industrial uses means the people are really squeezed in there. And we say 45,000 plus, it's probably closer to 50,000. As the residents that are in Chelsea, many are undocumented, so they don't get into the census. And aside from undocumented immigrants, many folks are just very highly mobile, renters and folks who are in housing instability, so they're kind of couch surfing. And so there's more people there than the census lets on, really. We're a very diverse community in Chelsea. About 3/4 identify as ethnic minorities. It's a real mix. As some of you may know, Chelsea has a rich history of Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, huge Jewish community for many years. And now there's a Puerto Rican community, a Somali community, really very, very diverse, large Latino population. And about a quarter of the population there are living below the poverty line. Across the creek in East Boston, which is, a neighborhood of Boston, of the municipality of Boston, 5 square miles, but about 3 of those are taken up by Logan International Airport. So realistically, where the part where people are living is pretty similar to the size of Chelsea, a little bit larger, a little over 2 square miles, and 55,000 plus. Again, traditionally an immigrant community, East Boston. We went from Irish to Italian and maritime Canadian, Nova Scotia. My family came to this country through East Boston, through Italy and Nova Scotia. Today we have a large Colombian, one of the largest Colombian populations in the U.S., and also Salvadoran. And so we are the only neighborhood in Boston that is still majority Latino. And about 17% or so living below the poverty line. And that number has actually dropped, as in recent years. As you may know, the East Boston has been a pretty hot real estate market, and so displacement has been a big issue. In the future, we will not be an immigrant community anymore, as it's gotten too expensive for immigrants to live here. I lucked out and bought during the recession, so I would not be able to afford to live here if the market hadn't tanked back in 2008. And when we're talking about these communities, this picture here is sort of a foreshortened view with a big telephoto lens looking across Chelsea. And the smokestacks you see off in the distance here are over in Everett on the border of Chelsea on the western side. That's the Mystic Generating Station and the Everett Marine Terminal, the liquefied natural gas terminal. Then you've got all of Chelsea in between here. There's the City Hall cupola. And then in the foreground, we have the tanks of what is now the Global Oil Facility on the Chelsea Creek, which is all the way over on the easternmost side of Chelsea. So Chelsea is really hemmed in on either side with infrastructure. And really, this infrastructure is not necessarily in service to Chelsea, it's in service to the region. We do this one exercise. If we were in person, I had an audience in front of me back before everything was Zoom. We would do an exercise where I'd ask everyone, who here drives a gasoline powered vehicle, and people would raise their hand. And some people wouldn't raise their hands because they have an electric car or maybe they take transit. And then I'd say, well, all right, keep your hands up. Who here drives around in the wintertime and people would raise their hands. Who here, and you'd keep going to try to, who here heats their house with oil? And, a couple people maybe, and there'd always be a few holdouts. And so finally we'd say, who here eats fresh fruits and vegetables? And that finally would get everybody raising their hand. And we'd say, well, if any of that is possible in the greater Boston area because of the sacrifices people in East Boston and Chelsea have made for that industry to allow that to happen in the region. And so for some of those industries we're talking about, our waterfront is home to Eastern Minerals, where we have road salt that's brought in from around the world by tanker and is trucked out by diesel spewing tractor trailer trucks. You can see some of the trucks here, pretty large trucks, but they're dwarfed by the size of the salt pile. And that provides road salt for most all the municipalities in Massachusetts. Also along the waterfront, or just on the border between Chelsea and Everett, is the New England Produce Center, the largest independent produce distribution center on the East Coast. It provides fresh produce from the maritime provinces down to the mid-Atlantic states, with 37,000 trucks going in and out annually, all diesel trucks spewing fumes into our neighborhoods and running over the roads and wear and tear on things. Also, as you look at a satellite image here or aerial shot of the city, you can see a lot of round white things. Those are all petroleum storage tanks. So 70% of the region's gasoline and diesel for our vehicles comes in by tanker and is stored here. It comes in by marine tanker and it gets taken out by tanker trucks, which are diesel burning trucks driving through our communities. 80% of the region's home heating oil is stored here, and 100% of the jet fuel used at Logan Airport. For regional highways, obviously the Tobin Bridge, Route 1, the Route 1A coming into the Mass Pike through the tunnels. So you've got the Callahan and Sumner, and you've got the Ted Williams Tunnel. So a lot of transportation, regional transportation infrastructure. And we're talking about in total about 270,000 daily vehicle trips going through Chelsea and East Boston. That's a lot of air contaminants over our heads. And of course, Logan Airport. So Logan Airport continually expanding its operations. They have reached an all-time high. They've recovered from the pandemic, and their number of flights and operations and number of passengers are at the highest they've ever been, which means more and more traffic coming into the neighborhood to get to the airport. It means more and more air pollution, ultrafine particulate matter and black carbon blanketing our neighborhoods and all of our children and our families all breathing that in. And then there's other things like casinos going in, other infrastructure, not exactly critical needed infrastructure, but it's there and it has an impact on the communities as well. Which is all to say, we have a lot of stuff that we're dealing with on a regular basis. And the way that we deal with it quite frequently over the past 30 years, usually it's somebody proposing another kind of use in our neighborhoods. So a number of years ago, a typical campaign for Green Roots would have been this one, where a guy named Jim Gordon, who you may remember, had proposed Cape Wind. And he was a forward thinker, and he was proposing clean energy off the Cape, and was fighting against people down on the Cape who didn't want to see on the horizon little wind turbines. And so he had a long fight there. But while he was promoting his image as a purveyor of green energy, he was also proposing a diesel burning power plant for Chelsea. And so that always struck us as a little strange. For the folks in Hyannisport, you had wind turbines. For the people in Chelsea, you had a diesel burning power plant. So we fought this project. It was right across the street from the only elementary school in Chelsea. So this is a rendering of what it would have looked like. It would have been literally just across the tree line from the playground at the school. And we fought them in the courts as they were trying to cite this. We went through the process of, in the citing process to fight it. But then we also had a campaign of mobilizing the community, our youth, to show up and really bird dog Jim Gordon wherever he went, and to really kneecap his image as being this clean energy sort of maven, and really expose that really he was just a businessman trying to make as much money as he could wherever it made sense. And in this case, it didn't make sense to us because we were already overburdened with enough air pollutants in our community. And we won. We prevented that from going in. So that was one of our victories. We have a tendency to be belligerent and to fight projects, and that's frequently necessary. However, we also have a warm and happy side. We work with people as well. After many years of fighting and squawking at the folks at the New England Produce Center, we decided to try to work with them. And we had a hard time because they didn't want to return our calls because they figured we were probably complaining about something. But one of our members, who served on the Board of Health in Chelsea, she pursued this gentleman here, the bald guy in the middle. He's the manager of the Produce Center. He didn't want to hear from us at all, but this woman pursued him and kept telling him, we have an idea for a project. And this was during the Obama years, and they had Obama Bucks, the programs he had after the recession. And there was money available through the EPA to retrofit on the back of all these trailers. There's an air conditioner unit, and all of them had been running on the low grade diesel. They call it red diesel. It was the bottom of the barrel kind of diesel, the dirtiest stuff you could get. And all of these tractor trailer trucks are running these air conditioning units continually, and they were burning so much diesel and just contributing to the air quality burden in the community. And we applied and received funding from the EPA to retrofit all of these, they call them reefers, refrigerated units, with electric plug-in air conditioners, which resulted in eliminating 2,000 tons of annual air pollutants from those old diesel engines, improving our public health outcomes, improving the air quality, and it really was a win for them. So we've improved our relationship with them, and now we get they donate some fruits and vegetables for our annual gala dinner. If you come to our gala and there's fruit out there, this guy here, Pete, he supplied it. So we do collaborate with folks, and when necessary, we fight them, whatever it takes to win. So I wanted to back up a little bit. I think when my mother used to ask me, like, what is it you do for work? And I'd say environmental justice. And she's like, I don't understand what that is. And environmental justice has been sort of a niche thing for so long. And I think it was during the debates between Biden and Trump that Biden actually talked about environmental justice. He talked about fence line communities, and EJ as a field finally came into its own in the last 4 years. And a lot of funding from the Biden administration went to environmental justice. Prior to that, it was a little bit of an misunderstood field. People didn't really get what it is. When I was at ACE, we used to do tours, toxic tours for people, and we would do this exercise on big butcher sheets of paper that we put up on the wall. So I'll do it digitally here. And we'd write environment on one side and justice on another sheet. And we do one of those things where I'd call out, usually it's a group of students, college students or high school students, and we'd say, when I say the word environment, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And we'd go through it, and people would say things like trees, air pollution, water, climate change, whatever, recycling. And then when I'd say, all right, justice, what's the first thing you think of? And people would say the court system, police, the school to prison pipeline, civil rights, whatever it happened to be. And on one side of that line, we're really talking about things and systems. And on the other side of it, we're talking about peoples and processes. And the thing about working in environmental justice, and the thing that makes it interesting for me, is that it's a 50-50 split. We really are working on both sides of that line. We are just as concerned about the court system, about civil rights, about the school to prison pipeline, the behavior and practices of the law enforcement. Those are all things that are just as important to us as the hydrological cycle, as climate change and atmospheric science. It's the merging of these two things equally. The one thing that it's not justice for the environment, which frequently people will see something being proposed that's, you know, contaminating a watershed or something like that. And they say, oh, we need environmental justice here, but they don't really address any of the people. They're just addressing the environment part. So there is an environmental advocacy part to EJ, but there is just as much the social justice aspect of it. And that's where we talk about environmental justice. And now there's a whole bunch of justice terms. So there's climate justice, transit justice, food justice, housing justice. We broke ranks and decided to call it energy democracy when we worked on it, to be more explicit. But racial justice, all of these things that for progressive groups, these are all different issues that people have been working on, and they're all within the bailiwick of what we do at Green Roots on any given project. We're looking at housing. We've set up a community land trust in Chelsea that's looking at trying at different ways to try to keep people in their houses, in their homes, because of the housing crisis and displacement. We're looking at issues of race and looking at issues of investment in the transit system. These are all parts of it. And the one thing that really stitches these progressive kinds of thought together about this is that really when we look at the system that we have had and the one we currently have, certainly, that it comes down to just the status quo just really sucks. The what we have right now just isn't working. The outcomes are not right. And one of the things that we look at quite frequently, and I use this example a lot, is Serena Williams. This is an African American woman who is one of the richest and most well-known Black female athletes, bar none. And she nearly died in giving birth to her child. And that is a story that is repeated whether you are super rich like her or you're a low-income Black woman in Roxbury. The same thing, the maternal death rate is much higher than for white women. And that has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with race. And so one of the things that we are confronting are health outcomes where even if you hold and you standardize for people's income levels, the outcomes are still more negative for African Americans than they are for whites and for other non-white groups like Latinos and others. So we are focused on income levels, but we're also focused on race is an important issue in this. And it's one, especially with gentrification and for environmental justice for many years, the sort of tagline was the idea that your zip code dictates your health outcomes. Well, nowadays with gentrification, that's not necessarily true. Parts of neighborhoods that used to be very poor, like East Boston, are changing very rapidly because of the housing market. So you really do have to look at the people as well as the environment that they're living in. So the EJ movement, some of you may know a little bit about the case of Warren County, but this was, you can figure the civil rights movement going from post-war period all the way through the 60s. 1970, Earth Day starts, the EPA is founded, an environmental movement starts. By the end of the 70s, the civil rights movement and the environmental movement come together at a flashpoint in Warren County, North Carolina, where somebody had the beautiful idea of, I need to get rid of these PCBs. I'm going to spray them on the side of the road. And they did that through a Black neighborhood in a Black county. And that was back in 1978. And they were found guilty. This area was declared one of the first EPA Superfund sites. And all of this PCB contaminated soil was scraped off the side of the road. And then they decided we got to get rid of it. So they ended up saying, let's put it in a landfill in the same community. And the community said no. And some of these pictures here, you see of people lying down in the street, direct action, preventing the trucks from getting to the landfill. That was what went on in the early 80s as folks were fighting the dumping of all of this PCB contaminated soil in their community, which had already was home to a number of other contaminated sites. This this fight, I think an important aspect of this slide is just to highlight the fact that the EJ movement really was sparked by African American communities, and especially African American communities of faith. The beginnings of the EJ movement was very closely aligned with the faith community that was bringing groups together from around the country, primarily African American groups, to talk about these issues and to throw down the tenets of environmental justice, the principles that have guided our work ever since. Um, and I just throw the slide up also to say that the landfill that eventually got built in the early 80s was recently closed in 2003, and the lawsuits that were started beginning of this whole thing just actually wrapped up. I think I couldn't find the exact date, but it was in the 2000 teens, like before the pandemic, but not too much before, like 2017 or so. The final court cases were wrapped up, and this thing started in 1978. So these cases can last a long time. Coming back to another topic to sort of have an example of the kind of systemic issues that we are trying to address. Many of you are probably familiar with the concept of redlining. This was the post-war government program that provided home loans to folks, where they went out and they evaluated blocks, census blocks, or just tracts of land in different neighborhoods, and they assessed them for their credit worthiness for loans, whether you should provide home loans in these areas. And if you were in red, you did not get any loans. If you were in yellow, you were a high risk and they probably wouldn't loan to you. If you were in blue, it was a bit of a better risk area. We're looking here at Chelsea is over here. This is East Boston, Charlestown, and then down here is downtown Boston over here. And you can see the north end was a red zone, East Boston, most of Chelsea. And these risks were rated on the basis of the quality of the housing, the recent sale history, but most importantly, on the ethnic characteristics and trends in those blocks. And when we say that they were looking at the trends there, if we look at some of the actual text of the forms that they would fill out, and this was like in the 50s, they actually would describe, there was a field that was percentage Negro, and then they would put in a number of what percentage of the community was African American. They would describe it as what is the infiltration of, and that was usually filled out with Jew or foreign, and then they would specify exactly what foreign, Italian, Irish, and if it was Italian or Irish or Jew, then usually it would get redlined. That's why the north end was redlined. The housing stock was a little bit older, needed some work, but also in the file, it said infiltration of an Italian. This particular one I have on the screen was actually describing, I think, the South End or Lower Roxbury, somewhere around there. And you can see one of the detrimental influences was a cosmopolitan population, which was probably a nice way of saying that it was about 25% Negro and infiltration of foreign and Negro. So it was just tremendously racist. And that really dictated the kinds of investments that occurred in these red line zones. So now when we think of the legacy of that, that's a horrible thing. It was in the past, though. They stopped it at some point back in the 50s or 60s, right? So it doesn't affect us today. But if we look at, and here's all of Boston, this is West Roxbury down here, Brookline and East Boston up here, downtown. And you can see the red line zones. So South Boston and Lower Roxbury, South End, and Roxbury, part of Dorchester, Grove Hall, all of that being redlined. And if we looked at today's minority populations, you see that it corresponds, the greater minority populations like in East Boston and here in Roxbury and Dorchester correspond to some of these redlined areas. But when we look at tree canopy coverage, the darker green obviously is more canopy coverage. If you look around South Boston and the Lower Roxbury area, it has pretty scant tree cover. East Boston has the lowest canopy cover of all of Boston. And then if you start checking out heat island effects, the effect of all the paved surfaces just trapping in the heat during the hot days of the summer, which really increases a lot of negative health outcomes, you see there is a correlation a bit between some of the hot spots that we see in these areas and some of the redlined locations. If you were doing this a few years ago, the correlation's a little stronger. What's actually happening in Boston is the housing market has improved so much that some of these areas, even like in East Boston, as I said, it's been getting wealthier, but it doesn't mean it's gotten greener just yet. Takes time for the canopy cover to come in. And then down here, just a health index. So this is the redder it is, the lower quality health outcomes there are. And you can see again, it's corresponding to the minority populations, and that corresponds to areas that were redlined. So the red line communities were not invested in. The red line communities was not where the city was planting trees. The red line communities were not where there was investment in the housing stock, so that there would be yards that would be maintained, that there would be investments in infrastructure that would address some of the issues such as that led to some of the heat concerns that we have. And finally, just do a quick time check. These, to bring it up a little closer to now, these are some actual documents that were leaked from consultants who were looking at siting facilities. So in 1984, this company was looking at siting trash incinerators, and these were their notes to their client. When you're looking to put a trash incinerator in California, you should look for a conservative Republican free market community. You should look for Catholics. You should look for low-income communities. You should look for old-time residents, people not involved in social issues. And then the communities you should not try to post these things in. You don't want college-educated people. You don't want yuppies and housewives. You don't want middle and upper income or liberal Democrat welfare states. I mean, they just basically said the quiet part out loud. They just wrote it out and said, this is what it is. It's straightforward, classist, and racist kind of attitudes, and that these are the places where you can stick these polluting assets, and these are the places where you shouldn't. So that was in 84. Bump it up to 1991. Another company was doing a window survey for places to put a nuclear waste dump in North Carolina. And you can see as they assessed the different communities, Cherry Grove had residences of site minority owned. So that was in. But someplace that was fairly affluent, that was out. Very depressed area, hey, that's a good location for nuclear waste. Someplace with trailers or foreclosures, someplace with distressed areas, or here's a place where Sheriff Goodman was concerned about job losses. Well, that's a great place to put in a nuclear waste dump because they'll take it. So you can see that the people who actually do the work on the ground made no bones about actually stating what they were doing. Frequently, corporate communications, they figured out a way to sort of hide some of this kind of language. But really, that's the mindset that's going on. And this is the kind of systemic racism that leads to citing things in communities where they think they won't put up a fight. Which leads me back to East Boston and how I got into the energy sector. This is an aerial shot looking at the Chelsea Creek here. And this is a piece of land that a few years ago looked like this. I live off to the left a little bit on this screen. Here's the playground that's in my neighborhood. An urban wild site on the creek that we fought to get put in there, the first public access point onto the river. And in this location here, Eversource proposed to put in an electrical substation. So this is from the other angle looking at that same location. And it would have been a cable going underneath and a couple of transmission lines coming up to a electrical substation, which would step down the voltage for local distribution. And it sounded like a great idea to Eversource. Didn't sound like a great idea to us. And some of the concerns we had was, and the reason why I got involved, because I was working on coastal resiliency. And this, as you can see, is right next to the creek. And this is all landfill. So it is scheduled, basically forecast to be flooded in the future. So we're concerned about sea level rise, storm surge, and flooding because of extreme rain events. We've had, back in 2018, we had a couple big winter storms. This stretch of street was flooded. The whole road was closed off to traffic. And this is where they're putting in the substation. We were concerned about equipment failures. When these things fail, if they flood, they fail and they blow up. They have a tendency to spark and have big electrical fires. And you can see this tank right here is an 8 million gallon tank of jet fuel, which is right next to it. So, and here's where people are living right across the way. So we sort of felt like it didn't make sense to put this here. Also, we had sort of planned to put in an additional soccer field in here because the field over here gets a lot of use between baseball players and soccer players. So we wanted to put in an additional field in here, which would be a fine thing to have in a flood zone, because if it floods, it's not a big deal. It's just a soccer field. Having infrastructure is another issue. People were concerned about electromagnetic radiation. That was a little bit less of a real concern. But one of the things that came out from this, and I won't go in through the whole campaign, but one of the things we learned through this whole process was how our energy infrastructure system works. And we realized it really is a scam. We are really getting screwed with our electrical system. The capital cost of this project, 100% of it, is all being paid by the ratepayers. It's a little bit like you paid the mortgage on a house, and then once you paid off the final payment, somebody else keeps the house and then charges you rent for living in it. It really makes no sense how our electrical system is paid for. And that's where we started working in the field of energy democracy, which is really, energy democracy is looking at this effort to transition our energy system from being this fossil fuel model to being something much more sustainable. But more importantly, it's also looking for a way to make this system actually much more responsive to the desires and needs of the people, as opposed to the investor-owned utilities that run the energy system currently. It's about making this thing having more transparency and more understanding. At this point, most people with the energy system, you pay a bill once a month, and when you flip your switch, the lights go on. And that's basically all most people know about their electrical system. So we have a project looking at microgrids. So if you think of electrical grids in general, so I'm transitioning here, just trying to making note of time. I want to try to get through a couple of last slides to have some time for questions. Our electrical system really runs a one-way direction of power plants producing electricity at a high voltage, and it gets transmitted across big power lines to substations that step it down to your local distribution system. And all of this part here is owned by Eversource or National Grid, and they charge you for the use of this system, and they also charge you to construct and build this system. And then they charge you for their maintenance of the system. So they're charging us multiple times, and then they just charge us for the electricity we use, and we just pay the producer for that. And they don't get any money off of that. They get all their money off of this part. And you notice it's all going in one direction. Well, a microgrid really consists of a lot of distributed energy generating things like small windmills or solar on your roof, or you could have a solar on your roof and then a battery storage on your house as well. All of that stuff is connected in a small portion of the grid. And what ends up happening is that the electricity can run in both directions. So when you're able to produce electricity, you can use that, and the excess you can put into the grid. And when you actually need electricity, you can pull from the grid. And so that is sort of the general idea of where we want to go with our electrical grid. But what that will require is a lot of this little box here that just says controller. What that really means is a lot of complicated computer equipment and additional infrastructure to manage the back and forth of the electricity. It's accounting for how much electricity is being used, but it's also managing the loads from an electrical engineering perspective. It's quite complicated. But it is an opportunity for people to actually generate their own electricity on their rooftops and be able to save a bit on their bill and to have a bit more visibility into the system. So the plus side of a microgrid is that you have more resilience to extreme weather events because you have these batteries that you can use during blackouts. You can reduce your energy costs. And we're trying to model a community-owned and driven approach, which is a bit different than having an investor-owned utility running it. And we're trying to expand clean energy and access to green jobs. And here in Chelsea, we actually are starting to put in, we have 3 projects that we're starting with, where we're putting solar panels on the DPW building in Chelsea, and we're putting battery storage at City Hall and at the police department. And so the idea is that these batteries will be charged during the day. And then if at peak hours in the summertime when everyone's using air conditioning, these buildings, and we'll have add in more buildings over time, could be using their battery so that not so much electricity needs to be put into the grid. So that peak that we need during the summertime where everyone's using, we can shave a bit of that peak off by relying on our battery storage. And we can also contribute energy through the solar panels on the buildings that we have. And so that's in a normal scenario. But in an emergency scenario, so these are flood zones in Chelsea, you can see if there was a flood and buildings went out or the power went down, some of our emergency facilities could be running on these backup batteries. If it's during a sunny time, we would have solar panels that could help charge them. But that backup battery would help provide some electricity to a set of buildings. Ideally, over time, you would increase the size of that microgrid, but at the very least, you could have the emergency facilities controlled by that. Now, the interesting sort of, I believe that might be the last slide, so I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. And I'll just say the exciting part of all of that is that we are looking at 2 different models of implementing this. We're working with a group in Chinatown that's looking at individual property owners and getting them to put these this equipment in. And in Chelsea, we're working with the municipality to put together a governance model that would sort of be like a conservation commission. Like you would have residents sit on an energy board and they would make decisions as to where we would put solar panels next. Like we want to move on to the Chelsea Housing Authority buildings and the public schools, put solar panels on all of them, put battery storage on all of them so that our microgrid will grow. And ultimately, what we want to be able to do is to have enough capacity in all these batteries that the city owns that they could actually sell to the grid operator, the company that, the organization that runs our grid. We could guarantee a certain amount of capacity during those peak summer times, and they would pay us for that. And that money would go into a fund for the city of Chelsea that would help defray the energy burden on the community itself, so that the city is putting in these assets, developing revenue, and that revenue would lower people's energy burden, meaning their electrical bills, not just homeowners, but also renters, because it's commonly owned by the entire municipality. So that's one model we're doing. Other folks have like a community solar model where it could be like nonprofits that are doing this. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it, but no one has really figured out, has really nailed down the best way to do it. And so these are really experiments. We're kind of trying this out and seeing if it works. And the utility companies aren't too happy about that because they like the way it works now, where we all just pay and pay and pay and pay more, and they own it all. And so we're trying to figure out a way to sort of undercut that system and change the status quo on our energy system for the benefit of our community. And that was sort of a whirlwind of EJ and projects that Green Roots have been working on. And I want to stop there to take any questions and talk a bit more if you guys have something in particular you'd like to take on.
Well, thank you, John. So does anybody have a question? Mary, I think your hand was up first. Mary Sherman?
I actually don't have a question, but St. Peter, St. Pedro Episcopal Church in Salem has been working with the city of Salem. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
They're working with the city of Salem, I believe it's Eversource that is their action fund. And their plan is to use solar and windmill and geothermal wells and store all of the energy in the parking lot of St. Peter, Pedro, and then the whole community, anybody that wants to get into that would be able to use that green power. They started it because there's a section of really low income people that attend St. Peter, St. Pedro. So he was trying to figure out how to do that. Plus the fact that it's cost them so much to heat their church because it's not insulated and it's got a really high roof. But it's really expanded into a really long, beautiful project, except that the current regime in Washington has now pulled back some of the money they were hoping they were going to get. So they're looking for other sources.
Familiar.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, we have a bunch of people who've had their hands up and we're queued up. Let's see, Russ, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the differential in costs or energy costs would be between a microgrid and what is being paid, typically by the customer now.
Mm.
Are we looking at a 10% saving, 50% saving, what?
It's not, it's sort of because it's done together as a group, it's hard to sort of say what would your savings be right off the bat. It's one of those deals where, sort of like when the folks come and they do an evaluation of a solar panel on your house and battery storage, and they do a sort of an amortization table of how long will it take you to pay off that capital asset, and then you'll start earning money off of that. What we're doing is we're doing economies of scale. By doing it through the municipality, they can take advantage of either federal grants or state grants, as well as bonding to put out these assets. And it's a little bit easier for them to do that than for an individual homeowner. And certainly for renters, it's not a question that they can do it because they don't own their roofs. So the savings ultimately will be sort of accumulated and shared out. So it gets kind of hard to compare it to just one homeowner. Like if they could do a super microgrid and just have a solar panel and battery storage just for themselves. But nobody will have a roof big enough in Chelsea, a residential roof that would generate enough electricity you'll always have to pull some from the grid. So, it really is a question that you have to work with other people and put together a sort of group effort to come up with the savings. So I don't really have a straight answer to your question because it's not a replacement for relying on the grid currently. I don't know if that makes sense.
Jerry, you want to go next?
Thank you. John Walkie. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I mean, and what you guys are doing there is a beacon. All we have to do is take notes and copy you. Little brag here, my son is in California. He's working on local grids at a municipality level. His spreadsheets are scary. Lots of money can be saved. Keep it in the community. Keep the control in the community. You still maintain a link to the larger grid, but you can be highly independent of it and get paid for the services that you can provide to the grid. It works out just from a financial way. And aside from the fact that you're not using fossil fuel anymore. So many benefits. I keep coming back to the idea of some kind of local grid, because when we have discussions about things like peaker plants, we got to have it because the grid needs it, and then we can't. If you have renewable energy, you can't get it onto the grid in your lifetime because there's so many barriers. And so they make it hard, and then they say, well, we obviously need to continue using fossil fuels. So this is what you're doing if you get 40 or 50% or maybe up to 60% of your energy locally can be a big deal. So I encourage you to keep on with it, and I wish you every success. It's a great model. Thank you.
Jerry,
Thank you very much for your presentation.
sure thing.
Thank you, Jerry. Fran Ludwig had a question in the chat. Fran, do you want to go ahead with that one?
Sure. So I know you have many projects, including some that involve youth, which is great. And I just wonder, how can we support you? Financially, I guess is always an opportunity, but also with advocacy. How can we keep up to date with what you're doing, and how can we stay involved?
Sure. Well, obviously the financial one's always a good one, but also just signing up for our newsletters is important, because one of the things, we're starting off the new state legislative session. The last one was pretty much a clown show. By the end of it, it was really a mess. But there are a number, we made a few wins in the last one at the last minute. And there's a number of pieces of legislation moving forward, especially around distributed energy resources, or DERs is the term they're using. And that's basically some of the stuff that Jerry was just talking about, and that I described, the solar panels and the stuff that's going on behind the meter, of having stuff distributed out. That is really the future. In the same way that our telecommunications went from Ma Bell, and you had one cable owned by people, to having the internet, where communications was all a bunch of smaller companies and a bunch of information's transmitted in little packets. Our energy is going in the same way. Instead of a Ma Bell just putting out the electricity in one direction, we're going to have everybody generating their own electricity in different places. And we need to be able to manage that. And right now, the corporations don't have their arms around this concept yet. So we have the opportunity to put something in place. If we have the right policies there, if they don't get hijacked by lobbyists from the industry, we could put in legislation that will really make sure that our energy sector is transformed in a way that is much more responsive to people. And we'll be working on some of that legislation with our allies at Conservation Law Foundation and other organizations. And as that stuff starts to move forward in the legislative cycle, we'll be reaching out to everyone to call your legislator, and we'll be asking to do another presentation to go into detail on some of this stuff. So that is a way that that you will all be able to help. And then just swing by the website and sign up for the newsletter, and that'll give you a handle on what's going on, because there's lots of fun ways to be involved, whether you want to come out and plant a tree or go to the teaching kitchen and learn some new recipes. There's a lot to do to get engaged. So it doesn't all have to be calling legislators, which isn't always the most fun thing in the world, but.
Okay, thanks, John. Paul Poppenchock?
Good afternoon. John, thank you so much for the master class on this, the grid and what the future holds. I had the opportunity to work on a microgrid at the Food and Drug Administration in White Oak, Maryland. Honeywell was the control supplier. PJM was the host utility. And there was a whole lot of it was like building a nuclear plant, you made it up as you went along, and there were a lot of cost overruns and so on. And the control handshake between the grid and the microgrid was a key element. And the software that drove that, how well developed is that? How much consensus is there about the protocol between the equipment manufacturer, the host utility, the FERC, and so on, including the compensation? Because, depending on time of day and so on, big differences in the potential benefit of having that plant go, island and remove itself from the grid, not caused by a outage or something like that.
A lot of that stuff is all out there to be determined, right? For the project that we're working on, a lot of it is it's going to be we're still just navigating. Our contractor is Ameresco, and they're navigating with Eversource just to get interconnect agreements, which are the agreements to just put these assets onto the grid. And
Exactly.
it is a horrible process. And part of it is because those questions you just asked, in fairness, Eversource doesn't have an answer. They're trying to figure those out. And ISO New England, the grid operator, hasn't provided any of those answers. So everybody's sort of standing around looking at one another. And in the meantime, smaller contractors and green energy folks are moving these things forward. And the best that a lot of the regulators and the industry can do is to set up situations where I'll sell you electricity at 15 cents a kilowatt, and I'll buy it from your solar panel at like 5 cents a kilowatt, which is
Right.
you're getting screwed. But nobody, like the public, hasn't really seen that conversation. And the
Yeah.
one thing that's bringing this to the fore, and a lot of your questions will start coming, like there'll be a demand for these things to be answered, is the fact that the utility companies are submitting their grid modernization plans, where they talk about all the capital investment that's going to be needed. And we are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars to upgrade our grid, to do that microgrid thing of going back and forth with energy. And they're saying, how are we going to pay for this? Behind them, there's a huge sign that says record corporate profits. And they're kind of like blocking it as much as they can. And they're saying, how are we going to pay for this? I think it's going to have to be the ratepayer. And people are looking at their bills now and
Yeah.
saying, the amount of electricity I'm using, the supply, like the actual electricity is this much, and the transmission and deliverance is this much. Like, how much more can you make me pay? It's ridiculous. So I think that's going to hit a critical juncture, because people are going to be demanding an answer, and their only answer right now is, well, give me all your money and I'll make it work. And that's not an answer. We need
Yeah.
a better answer.
Truly. Thanks again.
No problem, Paul. Thank you for the
Thanks.
question.
David, you've had your hand up for a while. And then maybe we'll have time for one other question. If anybody wants to put a question in the chat, we can maybe try and combine a couple of them, but we're coming toward the end. David, you want to
Okay.
go ahead?
One question is the role, they talked about investor-owned utilities. There's also municipal light plants, which have good aspects themselves, but are somewhat more formal than a microgrid. Is there some happy ground in between the formality of a muni light to make it easier and a microgrid?
That's one of the areas, as we're looking at the governance model for these assets we're putting in Chelsea. I'm looking at municipal light plants and trying to figure out, how do these things come together? And we're kind of doing an end run. We're trying to like dress up a municipal light plant in other clothing and try to sneak it past, because the municipal light plants we have. Somebody told me, I was talking to somebody at the state, and they said some of our best operators are municipal light plants. However, some of our worst light operators are also municipal light plants. So it really comes down to, I mean, look who we have for president. You vote for somebody, people vote for people who aren't always the best. And that's the same thing. I mean, it's one of the things about energy democracy is that you really need people to be engaged. You know, put down the Facebook, stop watching the Super Bowl, and be engaged in something as mundane as your local government, because they're the ones that are going to send you a bill. And if you want it to be done right, do it yourself. You know, get in there, and it's civic engagement is more than just voting once every 4 years and doing jury duty. It's actually being engaged. And so the municipal light plants, we haven't had a new one aside from Fort Devens becoming the town of Devens in '97. We haven't had a new municipal light plant since like the 20s or something. I think Lexington tried to do it and they got nowhere. Municipal light plants are hard to do because the utility companies prevent them from going through. We are really going upstream trying to create a new one. So this microgrid is actually kind of our sneaky way of trying to get aspects of a municipal light plant without actually calling it that. I know eventually that the utility companies will figure it out and will come at us, but at this point, they don't know what to make of us still.
Thanks, Eric. I think you've got the last question.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for the great presentation. I'm doing a lot of work decarbonizing buildings around Metro Boston with a little company called Greener U. Like we're working on a church geothermal in Wellesley, and we did a air source heat pump decarbonization for a temple in Wayland, and we're working with an affordable housing complex in Mission Hill. And I did a solar for a little organization called Zoomix in East Boston. But my question is, like some of these organizations, nonprofits, because that's all my work is with nonprofits, are sort of doing these projects, going ahead with it, and they do tend to be well resourced, or sometimes like Zoomix, we got a funder to pay for it, or a couple of funders. And I'm just wondering how like organizations like that are moving forward with projects, and temples and churches especially, can like sort of bolt onto this or connect in with it and maybe help catalyze more. So anyway, that's sort of my question. I'm not sure there's an easy answer, but that's what I was thinking of.
No, I mean, I can sort of answer that and maybe speak a little bit to one of the questions in the chat about the Trump administration making this harder. It's definitely, I mean, the federal money that's been coming out for this kind of stuff has been really important. And I will give a major shout out to the Mass Clean Energy Center, which has been the major funder for this project. And they're a little bit like almost like venture capital. They're an angel investor. They invest in things, and they invest in things where they think that it may not work, but we're going to learn something by funding this project. If we give this a shot and it doesn't work, we're not going to never give you money again, but document it, make sure we find out what happened, and then we're going to build on that. So they really have a forward-looking sort of process to it. And our federal government has had that for the past 4 years. And with that funding going away, we're really going to be looking to the state to move this stuff forward. And I think more specifically to your question, as these different groups are looking at this field, I think it really is important for groups like this to get together and talk. There's a group called drawing a blank now. They helped us out with the website, Empower. They're working with municipalities to do a lot of decarbonization projects and things. And those spaces are important because I think we need to start thinking about how we connect our different projects together in a sort of microgrid fashion, where we help support the funding of these things and help together. I mean, it's an accounting system, basically. If I'm able to put in this amount of electricity and you're able to put in that much, and we all contribute something, the amount that we can put into the system begins to really make a dent in the demand. So that when the utility companies say, oh, we need to put in all this additional supply side investment that you're going to pay for and we're going to own, we can come back and say, actually, on the demand side, I can put in this amount of distributed resources that curb the demand so you don't have to make that investment. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to get savings from that. And together with my friends in different towns and different locations, we are all together going to share that investment or that savings that is realized and distribute that. And for those people who are in a very much a progressive mindset, they could think of ways to share that, distribute those earnings in a way that really lifts up those that are the least among us, and that those that need less would receive a smaller benefit, and those that need more would get a greater benefit on their bill. It's a way that we could have really a progressive, not progressive taxation, but a progressive benefit being provided through the system. It really is, it's an exciting moment. It's just a matter of weeding through some tremendously dull policy that makes it hard. You get excited talking about it in the abstract, and then when you sit down and look at the legislation, you think, oh my God, what did I get myself into?
Yeah. Well, I think we've come to the end. So again, John, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time and all the great work you're doing. And everyone here, I hope will, come together and share information and perhaps share some projects. I know we talked about one organization among the churches downtown that are starting to do that, but very much, many of us are working on trying to improve our buildings and maybe make the energy transition there to start with. But we also very much want to get involved with the local communities, the environmental justice communities that John's talking about. So again, John, thanks. We really appreciate your time.
And I did just drop my email in the chat. So if anyone has further questions or want to reach out, do feel free to email me.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate your coming and stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.